In this self-nip bobbly de baba dee ba doo doo. Greetings, listeners all around the world. You're listening to the UniquilibriuM podcast by Hypnoathletics, exercising your mind. I'm your host and guide, Hakeem Alibokus Alexander, and I'll be talking about all things metaphysical, hypnosis, and meditation for relaxation, sleep, lucid dreaming, and beyond. Get ready. Here we go. Greetings. This episode is going to be called Developing Telekinesis to Defend Against Supernatural Threats. It'll become very clear what I'm talking about, what are supernatural threats when I explain it. So there are a couple of steps to developing telekinesis. So I must explain that first so you can understand the possibility. I haven't fully developed any telekinetic abilities yet in this very special case of our reality. But I have roughly repeated an experiment that shows that we can in fact influence matter with our consciousness. And that was an experiment I did by influencing the outcome of a random number generator, which was set to be sort of like a digital coin toss, either producing heads, which would be represented by a 1, or tails represented by a 0 on a random number generator. And I'll put a link to that experiment that I did in the description of this podcast, so you can check it out. By the way, that noise you hear in the background is one of my binaural beat productions called Hana no Seishin, which means floor's spirit, the spirit of the flower, which is another one of my binaural beats, part of my demi-phase or demi-cerebral neurophasing audios, dedicated to my beloved Floor Elizabeth Carrasco, as part of my thanatology studies. And this developing telekinesis is actually related to that, which is what I've termed for now entering the realm of souls. And I recently recorded a 2-part podcast called How to Meet Your Loved Ones in the Afterlife, and how that's related to this current podcast, which is developing telekinesis to defend against supernatural threats, is that the steps are very simple. So back to what I was saying about not fully developing telekinesis, but to the point where I've repeated an experiment of being able to influence a random number generator. And I'll explain this really quickly, and when you hear what I'm talking about and how I explain it, you understand why I've come to the conclusion through this experiment that we can influence matter with our consciousness. And what I've done is what would be considered micro TK or micro PK. And some people have even said, I've gotten messages that said it's telepathy. But I'm calling it developing telekinesis, and you'll understand what I mean as I get through this explanation. So the experiment that I did was I downloaded a random number generator on my Android device. I have an old Galaxy S7 that I bought back in 2016. and it's called Random Number Generator Plus. And then I downloaded a screen capture app as well, and I turned them both on, and I recorded myself flipping this digital coin on the random number generator, either giving me a 1 or a 0. And the way I set it up was I selected the random number generator function on Random Number Generator Plus because it has other functions like rolling dice and also flipping a coin. And that gives me an idea. I should work with that one too. And anyway, so I did 15 tests in what I call one trial. So one trial consisted of 15 digital coin tosses. And the way I decided this ahead of time, whether I was going to focus on either getting more heads or more tails, or actually more ones or more zeros, was I actually flipped a coin. And if it landed on heads, it would represent 1, that meaning I would focus on attempting to get more 1s than zeros from this random number generator after 15 tests or 15 flips. And if it landed on tails, then that meant that I would focus on getting more zeros than 1s. And so now the significant part of this is very interesting, what happens when I tell you about getting up to trial 8. So at first, it was just going back and forth. So the first few trials, I flipped. So the trial 1 and 2, I pressed the button after deciding what I was going to focus on. And the first trial was what I call a telekinetic pass, meaning I got more of what I was looking for, but it was very slight. It was I got 8 of what I was looking for and 7 of what I wasn't trying to get. And I wonder if I have that paper here. Let me see. I think I can look at my results to be more accurate in the retelling of this. I think I do. I have a folder marked. Here it goes. So the first one was just, it was, I was supposed to get more heads than tails, and I got 8 heads and 7 tails. The second trial, the result was exactly the same, 8 heads and 7 tails, but it was a fail. Oh, no, it was the opposite, actually. The first one I was supposed to get more tails than heads, and I did, 8 to 7. 8 tails and 7 heads. The second outcome was the same, 8 tails or 8 zeros and 7 heads, but at that one I wanted to get more heads, so that was a fail. The third one was a pass, the fourth one was a fail, and the fifth one was a pass. And so you see it was back and forth, pass, fail, pass, fail, pass. Okay, but what I added after trial number 2, so what I started in trial number 3 was I drew a 0 and also a 1 on 2 halves of an index card that I cut in half or tore in half, so that I could help myself to focus, because I was having trouble focusing. I was just having some issues psychologically, so I was having trouble focusing on either a 1 or a 0, so I decided to give myself some help. And I did that, on trial 3, and when I did that, it was a pass. But then trial 4 was a fail again. Trial 5 and trial 6 were passes. Trial 7 was a fail. And then when I got to trial 8, I decided to not only look at the pieces of paper that I drew the 0 or the 1 on, but I made a recording of my voice saying over and over again, repeating 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, or 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, so that when I flipped the coin and it determined that I should focus on a 1, then I would listen to myself saying 1 while looking at the written down 1 that I put on the index card. And the same thing with 0. If it determined tails that said I should focus on more zeros, then I would not only look at the 0 I had drawn on a piece of index card, I would also listen to my voice saying it in headphones. And when I did that, from trial 8 all the way through 14, they were all passes. All of them were all passes. And I found that to be significant because half of them were not just like 8 to 7 passes. The very first one was 10 to 5. And the next one was 7, 8. Then it was 8, 8, 7. And then, then it was 12, 3. and 7, 8, 7, 8, and then 6 to 9. So it was just very interesting how that result changed as soon as I added my voice. So a couple things could have been happening there, that maybe I respond more to auditory stimulation as far as attempting to focus than I do visual. And I don't know, or maybe it was the combination of both, because what I'm eventually going to do is a trial where I only have the auditory stimulation and do my best to focus in my imagination on the digit 0 or the digit 1. And then I'll do another one where I'm just looking at the cards with the 0 or the 1 on it and attempting to say in my head the 0 and the 1. So we'll see what happens with those. But the point is that the results changed for 7 in a row, which is really against all odds for that to happen 7 times in a row by that change that I made. I mean, it happened as soon as I did the change. That's significant. That as soon as I decided to add that one more element to help me focus, it changed. So, now you might be wondering still how I haven't gotten to, how does that mean that if some people still think that that's just telepathy, communicating information to the system, and how it has anything to do with telekinesis, which is supposed to be moving objects. Well, there's a slight difference between telepathy and what these experiments that I've done, which are called micro PK, some say micro psychokinesis. So psychokinesis and telekinesis are used interchangeably. So micro TK, micro telekinesis, in that a physical system is still the random number generator on my mobile device. And so I have to be influencing something physically, even if on a microscopic level, like electrons and photons, in this system of circuits and this mathematical algorithm, in order for it to give more of what I'm focusing on, more ones or more zeros. So that's why I term it telekinesis, because I'm looking at how it's actually affecting a physical system. Now, it's not quite, moving, like lifting a pen or floating it over here and there, or lifting a table and different things like that. But the next experiments will start to work on attempting to get to that level. And here's how. So my hypothesis is that once I master the ability to influence the random number generator to give me more of what I want on a very consistent basis, once I've found a collection of techniques, or once I've mastered one technique that allows me to get there, then I'm going to use the same heads and tails, 1 and 0 system to develop a macro TK or macro PK telekinesis experiment, which I've already developed it. And if other people have already mastered the influencing of the random number generators, maybe you could attempt this. But it's basically, just imagine a letter-sized piece of paper, and on one half of the paper there's a 0, and on the other half there's written or drawn a 1, right, or printed a 1. And in the middle of the paper, or it could be a board or whatever, but you directly in the center, the first idea I had was to place an object like a marble, something very smooth, perfectly spherical, or a bead or a ball bearing or something else. It's probably best to use something that can't be affected by magnetism, like metal, so it should be made of something else like porcelain or glass. And maybe not so much plastic, because that can static and everything like that. But to put that on a perfectly level surface, and of course we can use a level, we can use a liquid level or a laser level to make sure it's on a perfectly flat surface. And then if you have the luxury, you can cover that entire setup with a glass case, or at least something to block any external air currents from affecting it. And then, in the same way that you determined whether you're going to get more 1s or more 0s, you can simply flip a coin and then look at the 1 or 0 that you're trying to get the marble to move towards, and or listen to an audio recording of your own voice saying that. Or, alternatively, you could look at the marble itself and try to push it towards that way while listening, and just looking back and forth from the marble to the 0 or the 1, whichever digit you're attempting to push it towards. So that's the simple basic setup with the experiment, and that's why it's developing telekinesis, because the object, the point, is to get to a level where you're able to move a visible physical object. That's why it's called macro PK versus micro PK, where micro PK, you're seeing things being affected at a level that's simply information digitally being displayed on a screen, and you can't see the underlying processes happening to cause that. But once you develop that skill, just like why I call, one of my developments is called hypnoathletics, exercising your mind, because I'm also a fitness trainer. I teach group fitness classes like yoga and Pilates, boxing, kickboxing, and as well as being a personal trainer. And I realized that one very important part of that is consistency and practicing and doing something over and over again. And I felt the same way, and I came up with the name in, I think, 2005 or 2006, when I graduated from the Hypnosis Motivation Institute in Tarzana, California, which happens to be the first nationally accredited college of hypnotherapy in the United States. And I came up with the name Hypnoathletics because I saw many similarities between exercising the body and exercising the mind. And I was much earlier became a fitness trainer and an athlete before I started practicing hypnosis, even though I started practicing hypnosis and didn't know it, mostly self-hypnosis, very shortly after I became an athlete. And that was because of reading books like Think and Grow Rich, which had things in it like auto-suggestion, and in other books similar to that I would later learn once I went to the College of Hypnotherapy. I learned that it was falls under the category of hypnosis. So anyway, so developing, so again, remember, this is called developing telekinesis to defend against supernatural threats. And then I also did mention how this is related to another podcast that I talked about, which was how to meet your loved ones in the afterlife. And, one of the subtitles of that was while you still live. You don't have to die to communicate with or meet with your loved ones in the afterlife, because the afterlife experience is very related to the dream world, which some cultures call it, dream walking or spirit walking. And just an example from the Tibetan tradition, roughly what I got from studying the bardo, the idea of the bardo in the Tibetan traditions, spiritual traditions from Tibet, is that when you learn how to do a certain practice, which is learn how to lucid dream, you're developing the same kind of abilities that you will need to navigate in the afterlife when you die, when you leave your physical body behind. And that's where my practice and understanding of that tradition ends. I don't need any more from that right now, because I've satisfied myself for now that that's all I need. And so what I mean by that is that I've come to understand that the abilities you learn in lucid dreaming are the same ones that you'll need when you leave your body. But before you get to that, it's very important to practice meditation, because actually practicing a certain type of meditation will help you to become a lucid dreamer, meaning you're aware that you're dreaming. But even more so, what I'm talking about when you're able to navigate through the bardo realms, or this afterlife, or this purgatory, this in-between life station that's defined by the Tibetan tradition, is you can develop a certain type of meditation that will help you to navigate through that realm. And I've labeled the practice something that might not be very familiar to a lot of people, but where did I put this here? I want to make sure that I stay consistent. So I start staying up at night and doing these podcasts. So what I'm calling, yes. I want to continue to relay the same information, but I'm calling it imaginative role play meditation. And I want to make sure that when we talk about imaginative, I want to make sure that we understand that I don't mean visualization, although that can be part of it. Some people are not able to visualize or to see pictures when they close their eyes, or to hallucinate things when they close their eyes or open. I can do both. I can hallucinate things with my eyes open or my eyes closed, and even better so when I'm deeply relaxed and in a meditative state. So this is very important, though, the imaginative role play meditation. So I haven't explained before specifically how to do this, but here's one way that anybody can practice. And this first part that I'm going to talk about is using visualization, but you can also do it using your other senses. But visually, it would be best for me to describe, because it's the best way that I know. I don't have the experience of not being able to visualize. I've always had a very vivid imagination as long as I can remember. So it's like this. I mean, if you have a place that you're familiar with, could be home, could be school, could be your job, could be a friend's house. What you do is, in imagination, you give yourself a starting point. You imagine, just like a maze. You imagine yourself maybe at the front door of this place, of home, of work, or school, the front entrance, or something that you normally enter through. And then imagine yourself walking from that entrance to a specific location in there, and very carefully taking your time to go through those steps to visually see yourself going into this location, and looking around and identifying as many things as you can remember. And some of you may have developed this already very well. If you can do that, you've done a great service to yourself as far as developing these different types of metaphysical or supernatural abilities, is by being able to use your imagination that way. And so from there, and because it's very difficult, because I practice all the time, but sometimes it becomes very difficult to keep that image stable, even if it's a place that you know. And when you can get that image stable, sometimes other things happen. So we have to be kind of careful about this, unless we want to spook people out. But sometimes our image or some other aspect of us, the sound of our voice or the scent of us or something else, can appear to the other people either in their dreams, or they might get a sense of being watched or something when you're around. And some of you might take advantage of that and that might be your motivation to start this practice. But that's been known to happen. I've had someone report that to me before. I had a friend who was in the hospital, and I would imagine going there every day in an advanced vehicle. And anyway, when she came out of the hospital, she said that she saw a UFO outside of her hospital window. And that's how I would actually show up there. I would show up in my advanced vehicle, or UFO, UAP, and show up there, and I would go and visit her and comfort her and keep her company. Because, there were a certain amount of times of visiting hours, and I couldn't be there all the time, and then I had to work and other things like that. So that's how I would visit, because I was just very concerned about her the whole time. So as I was laying down to sleep at night, it was difficult for me to sleep, so I would just focus my imagination on traveling there in this, advanced vehicle, and and visit her and talk to her and comfort her. And you know, she told me she saw several times a UFO show up there. And then there are other examples of that, which I won't get into now, but I've had other people report to me things like that. And you know, maybe I'll tell those stories at another time. So again, the first steps, and this is exactly, you know, the same thing as in meeting your loved ones in the afterlife, is to develop a meditation practice. And again, it's this imaginative role play meditation that I'm talking about, which is very important. And when you start to do it, if you have the luxury of the time to be able to sit back quietly, and sometimes it doesn't even have to be quietly, if you can develop this ability, which I've been doing when there's other things going on around you in noisy environments, all the better for you. But the thing is to start practicing, and start practicing sending your consciousness first through imagination. And you go to these places. That's how you visit places. You know, I've been to many places in the world before I actually visited these places physically, by reading books about them, by thinking about them, by imagining them, by first seeing some location in a movie and then going there in my imagination. And so that's the first way to be able to do this. And then you start mapping out environments, much like in the movie Inception, for example. You know, the more places that you know and see and you can store in your memory, the more places you can travel and the more environments you can build, like an architect. And so it's very important, though, you know, to start doing those type of things, to being able to hold stable locations. Just earlier today, I was doing that, and I remember visiting a certain place, and at first it was very difficult for me to just stand still in one room. I found it difficult to stand still in a room and just look at one part of it. But then after a little bit of time, and after also practicing some techniques to relax myself, just mentally relaxing myself and just calming down and just realizing that it's not that big of a deal, it's just a practice. And then also taking a few, you know, slow, deep breaths to just kind of settle myself. Eventually I was able to just be there. I was able to just be in this location. And then I tried it with other places and it worked out. So it just takes a little bit of practice. So for some, it's going to take more practice than for others. Everybody's ability to concentrate and focus, visualize and imagine is all different. And again, it doesn't always have to be visualization. There might be other ways that you know that you're in a place besides vision. It could be you using your stereopic, your binaural sounds. Like if certain places that you go, you can hear maybe a sound coming from the left side and one from the right side. Just like if you're listening to this podcast with headphones on, you'll hear that there's sounds in the background a little slightly different in the left and the right. And so by practicing different things like that, you know, you could practice standing in a certain place where maybe one foot is higher up than the other, like if you're standing on a hill, for example, or a slope someplace, or a staircase where one foot is down and one foot is up. And you can think about it that, I mean, there's so many ways that you can imagine. Remember, imagination doesn't have to necessarily be visual, although I thankfully am able to practice going places visually. So that's one of the first steps right there, is in developing supernatural or metaphysical powers or abilities, is to first use this imaginative role-play meditation and then bridge that into lucid dreaming. And one technique to help with lucid dreaming, and I'm only going to just talk about this one, there are many others that you can look up if this does not work for you, is to practice all day long, as many times as you can think of when your mind is not busy having to do something else, is to simply ask yourself the question, am I dreaming? And no matter what you're doing, you can answer the question, yes, I am dreaming. And the more you continue to practice this throughout the day and then every day, eventually this will show up as an automatic behavior. It'll be second nature, and you'll start to ask yourself this question in your dreams. And I love this bird. And this was Flora's favorite bird. Side note, when we lived in Hangzhou, China, this bird used to come up to our balcony all the time. And that's why you can hear it so loudly in this recording. It would come up to our balcony and just sit there, and she just loved visiting with this bird and watching it. And the other sounds you hear in the background are some construction that were going on down there. And then the humming sound and some of the other sounds that you'll hear in this binaural beat, a frequency formula, are tones that I've put together for focus, relaxation, and meditation. It can even help you with lucid dreaming. But continuing on the subject of lucid dreaming, so that's one way, by asking yourself the question throughout the day, every day, am I dreaming? And then answering, yes, I'm dreaming. Eventually, you're going to say, yes, I'm dreaming, while you're dreaming, and you'll become lucid. And it's very important to practice, being able to relax and stay calm, because sometimes you get really excited when you realize that you're lucid dreaming, and it can actually wake you up. But I've gotten to the point now where I actually have hours and hours and hours of lucid dreaming. I remember just today, I remember waking up at around 7, let's just say 8 in the morning, because it was very close. It was like 7:40, but let's say 8 o'clock in the morning. And I didn't have much to do until 6 in the evening, and then I went to the gym. So I just decided just to stay in bed, and I only woke up a couple times to go to the toilet. But the whole time, I was just in lucid dreams, one after the other. And it's amazing to be able to do that. I mean, why did I stay in bed that long? Because of what was happening. That's fascinating to me. That was like 10 hours of just lucid dreaming. It's just amazing how many things happen in there. And I know not everybody has the luxury to do that, but just the way that things are going for me right now, I can do that for now. But if you can, it's amazing. I mean, this is something that I've decided to study and focus, and I'm working on my PhD in metaphysical sciences. This is what I want to do. This is what I've decided to spend my life doing. No matter what else has been going on in my life, no matter where I've traveled to, or other jobs that I've had, or businesses I've tried to start, or whatever, this is one thing that I've always stuck with, besides a few other things like martial arts and creating music. So again, now this all starts with meditation, and using that meditation, that very specific type of meditation, which is important to then bridge it into lucid dreaming by that simple practice of asking yourself the question, am I dreaming? And then answering by saying, yes, I am dreaming. And the interesting thing about this type of imaginative role play meditation, as I'm calling it, is because you're putting yourself into certain environments that are familiar to you, and you're navigating around them. That gives you the ability to be able to steer and control your dream body or your astral body better when you're dreaming. And so you do several things. You can imagine that you're flying, you can imagine that you're walking, you can imagine moving forward, backwards, in any kind of different ways. And then you can imagine having different types of powers in these dreams. I wonder if I should play the same one again. I'm going to play another one called Downpour Phaser. I'll play that while I continue this podcast. So there are several things you can do. A few of them I would recommend are, I'm just going to stick to maybe 3 at the most for now. So the first one, like I said, is if you're not afraid of heights and things like that, is to imagine yourself floating and or flying, levitating, and moving around like that. The other thing is more closely tied to what we're developing, which is telekinesis or psychokinesis. And that's imagining being able to pull or draw objects toward you and push them away from you, or move things out of your way, or things like opening doors without your without the same kind of physical touching. I know the dream world is many people won't consider it to be real like the physical world. And in many ways, of course, it's not. But there's still a body that interacts, and it does a lot of the same things, like it obeys gravity and does all these different kinds of things that you do in your waking world. But you can use your mind, and for some people I've heard it's a lot more difficult, some people I've talked to do that at all. First of all, even to just lucid dream at all. But that's why practicing, the imaginative role play meditation by starting at the entrance of a place that you know. One of the things you can do is just imagine the door opening. That's a form of telekinesis or psychokinesis, even in your imagination. You're imagining things happening, things opening, closing, moving towards or away from you by you thinking about it happening. And this is very important because then this also helps to carry over into your dreaming world. So you have lucid dreaming where you become aware that you're dreaming, and then what I'm also referring to as super lucid dreaming, where not only are you aware, but you can control things telekinetically. You can fly, you can open and close doors, you can open and close drawers, windows, you can bring things towards you. If there's a cup across the table, you can float it towards you into your hand. You can also float it back to go put it down. You can form, you can do manifestation, and this is like the third one I'll talk about. You can form things, you can make a book appear in your hands, or a pen, or a tool of some kind like a hammer, or a screwdriver, or a weapon like a sword or a gun. So many things you can do manifestation. And something that's funny that just happened to me recently again in this whole long series of dreams that I was having, because I had just read it recently online where somebody was talking about how do you know you're dreaming, and one of the things that was mentioned was that you can't read in your dreams. But I very often read things in my dream. Whenever there's something to read, I can read it. Now, it doesn't say remain stable. Like the dream I had most recently where I read something, there were highway signs. And I remember getting close because I wanted to remember it for when I woke up to see if I could check if it was a real location, because it just felt so familiar. And it said 46 upon 16th. And those were like the streets. And that didn't make any sense, 46 upon 16th, but it was a sign of the street. And then there were other things that I read, like a different store that was there, but I was able to read it. And then there was also something in a book that I read. So I'm able to read very consistently in my dreams. And as I was dreaming, I knew I was dreaming, and I remember just thinking, ha ha ha, because I wrote a comment on that video saying this is not true for everyone. I think they had it as number 4, and I said this is not true for everyone because I very consistently read in my dreams. And as I was reading in my dream, I remember thinking, yeah, I'm right. I think that's hilarious. But it's funny because I'm dreaming. I know that I'm dreaming. I'm reading in the dream, and I have the awareness to think about and chuckle about the fact that I can read in my dreams. So, all right. So back to a little bit focused. So again, this ability to meditate and do this imaginative role play meditation, where you practice these things like navigating through a familiar location and opening the doors without touching the handle with your dream hand or your astral hand, right, your spirit hand, and closing them behind you. And you're moving upstairs and you're moving around and you bring things towards you and away from you, and then being able to stand still in one place and keep that environment stable without too many things changing, and then being able to float, fly, levitate around, to be able to manifest certain different objects like tools and different things like that. These all become very important when you begin to lucid dream. So, and the way again to start developing the ability to lucid dream and super lucid dream, to be able to use these abilities consciously, is to practice asking yourself the question as often as you can throughout your day, am I dreaming? and answering the question, yes, I am dreaming. And these things will help you to start developing telepathy and telekinesis. And for me, telepathy, I've already developed that. I don't want to get into that right now. I mean, but there's been so many different times. Now, actually, where I've read so many things. And a lot of it might be sort of like the TV show Psych, where maybe I'm just very perceptive and I can tell a lot of things right before they're happening, because that's usually when it is. But there have also been other things that have happened that are just, that would to a lot of people just be mind-blowing. And to me, they still are very exciting. It's just that I'm so used to it now that I'm still impressed. But it's just, I'm just very used to it. So another thing to add into lucid dreaming when you can, and this is something I've been able to do, is to carry over my thought experiments into my dream world. So something that I'm practicing now is I'm practicing influencing the random number generators, and I'm seeing them give me the results that I want. I go through the whole process in my dream, and I did it during this 10-hour dream marathon that I just had recently, where I flipped the coin in my mind. It landed on heads, it represented a 1. If it landed on tails, it represented a 0. And I would use the random number generator, and I'd press it, and I'd have it come out to be what I wanted to. Now, this kind of, cheating, because I can do it whatever I want in my dream, but that's the whole point. My whole point is that when you wake up, you have more of that confidence in your ability that you should 15 out of 15 times get 1s if your initial focus is to focus on 1, or to get 15 zeros if your initial focus is to focus on zeros. And you practice that also in your imaginative role-play meditation, and then carry that over into your lucid dreams. And these are all powerful steps of developing telekinesis. And again, I'm already confident that it exists simply because of the rough and crude experiments that I've done. But that one thing about what I mentioned earlier, that during the 8th trial, when I added the audio part of listening to my voice saying either 1 or saying 0, depending on what the coin toss determined that I should focus on, how suddenly, because of that, I got 7 in a row telekinetic passes where I was able to steer or push or draw in, some terminology says, the result that I wanted or that I was focusing on. Because, I don't know if it was want, it was designated a 1 or 0 by a coin toss. And so then it was me just to focus on getting that result. So, so that's the initial part of developing telekinesis. Now, all right. So now I'm at the point now, because I did name this Developing Telekinesis to Defend Against Supernatural Threats. And now how does this work that way? And so I'm using the term supernatural as a blanket term for all things supernatural, paranormal, metaphysical, otherworldly, not of this world, interdimensional, all that stuff. Because I found that they're very related. Because interestingly enough, the same techniques that I use to meet with the spirit of my beloved, and also is very useful in dealing with something very controversial, alien abduction. But the techniques of this imaginative role-play meditation and using those same techniques and same practices in lucid dreaming. Remember the navigating through familiar locations, the floating, levitating, flying, the opening and closing of doors, windows, drawers, and other things like that without, you're visualizing or imagining your hand doing it. The manifestation of various objects like stationery or tools or weapons. And then also the practice of influencing random number generators. in the imagination. So these things are very empowering when dealing with supernatural threats. And supernatural threats come to people in various forms, and it depends on where your heart is, which is your subconscious mind. It depends on what your belief systems are, because some people have experiences with hauntings of various kinds. So hauntings by spirits and ghosts and demons. And other people have experiences with aliens and trolls or other things that are disturbing to them. And I call them threats because the encounters that people have with these correlate very closely with nightmares, sleep terrors, such as sleep paralysis and or sleep apnea together. So sleep paralysis, you can't move, but you're aware of a malevolent presence, or you can't breathe, and or you can't breathe at the same time. And of course, many debunkers and skeptics and mainstream materialistic, paradigms of science will say that it's these experiences themselves of sleep paralysis and sleep apnea, where you can't move or breathe, and nightmares that are they're only the products of your mind. It's just your imagination, but there's no just your imagination. People's imaginations, someone might see a stick out of the side of their eye, or a charging cable for a phone on the ground, and jump in fear and their heartbeat, and they start sweating and because they think it's a snake. Or someone could see someone from across the street and think that, oh my goodness, that's my wife or my husband or my beloved, or someone I love, even though they've passed away. But for that moment, your imagination causes a cascade of feelings that generate physical experiences in your body. So there's no just your imagination. Imagination is very powerful. Our minds are very, very powerful. And they have definite concrete effects in our physical world. Just like the placebo response or the placebo effect, where it's been shown many times that anti-anxiety medications are not as effective, or have the same effect, or is less effective, like I said at first, not as effective as when people take placebo. So a doctor would give them a water or sugar pill and tell them that it's an anti-anxiety medication, and that works better than the medication that's supposed to have that effect on them. And these things, you can look it up for yourself. I'm not trying to prove anything here. I'm really just giving some examples and giving a little bit of a tutorial of developing telekinesis to defend against supernatural threats. And remember, the supernatural threats are many things that affect people. And these are nightmarish experiences that cause fear and terror and anxiety in people. And now the point here is that when you develop these abilities, developing telekinesis, because what I found is that developing telekinesis is the same process of imaginative role-play meditation and lucid dreaming, and developing these abilities to focus and concentrate on very specific things also empower you and develop the ability to feel confident in dealing when these experiences happen. And let's just say, for example, that these things are the result of our, and let's just brush it off like a lot of mainstream thinking does it. It's just your imagination. It's just a nightmare. But when you develop these abilities and you start thinking in a different way, when you start thinking, oh, I can control my imagination through practice. I can imagine myself going through different locations. I can imagine myself opening and closing things by thinking about it, by flying, by having super strength, by manifesting different things that I need or want, or different objects. or different experiences. When you start doing that, and then you carry that over into a lucid dream experience and a super lucid dream experience by asking yourself am I dreaming? Asking yourself the question, am I dreaming? And answering, yes, I'm dreaming. And then once you become aware of the dreams, to start practicing these things again. Remember the navigating through an environment, stabilizing certain things, relaxing to enjoy the experience, to manifest things, to use telekinesis to move things around, to manifest, right? All of that stuff becomes very empowering. And I know it for myself, personally, and I stopped having nightmares a long time ago because of this ability. And the only time I started having nightmares again, and I don't even know if I would call them that necessarily, it was just immense grief and sadness that would, of course, carry over to my dreams when Floor died. But what I've been working on are ways to meet with her, just like I did during my 10-hour lucid dreaming marathon that I mentioned earlier. There's some aspect of my imagination or her spirit, her consciousness, that still interacts with me every once in a while. And the thing about that, one of the reasons why I know that there's something more to just, as people try to brush it off as just our imaginations and just your mind making it up, is because these experiences are qualitatively different than some of the dreams that I've had. Because the feeling is different, but also the interactions. Because I can't make her respond to me any certain way. It's as if it's some completely different being. It's her in this dream world, which is a bridge, a connection to the spiritual world, the supernatural world, the non-physical domain from which aliens, angels, demons, extraterrestrials, all these other different supernatural entities move in and out from. And that's the, very important thing for us to understand, is that what people are calling by these different names, whatever they are, may show up in different forms, but they all have the ability, either through some kind of technology, whether it be a thought-based technology or what we might call meditation, or some people might call magic. To them could be, a computer-based type of program, but they have the ability to move in and out of a non-physical domain and into our physical reality in some way, shape, or form. Because people are able to see, hear, smell, and physically feel these things. And that could also be because we're altering our awareness to be able to see, hear, smell, and touch, taste sometimes these things. Also, other four senses of thermoception, temperature changes, nocioception, the feeling of pain, equilibrioception, the feeling of balance, and proprioception, the awareness of where you are in space. And all of these things can be practiced as well in the imaginative roleplay meditation, and then crossing that over into lucid dreaming. But again, the major point in all this is that these practices allow us to have more confidence and feel empowered when we have control over these experiences. The nightmarish feelings go away. The terror goes away, and it changes to excitement and thrill, because that's what it is for me. And another time I'm going to talk about some of the insane things that happen in these experiences that I just start to laugh at. And it becomes so amazingly empowering that regardless if it's something that's happening that would be considered a pathology, right? Like a disease state, like a mental illness, by practicing these things. And again, I'm not giving, advice as a psychologist or a psychiatrist. These things all fall under the category of something that's within my scope of practice as a clinical hypnotist. This is self-hypnosis. And it's a grand form of self-hypnosis because it takes a lot of steps. There's a lot of things in it that are involved here. But they're all self-hypnosis. These are things that I've worked with clients on before many, many times. And especially in the area of metaphysical hypnosis for meditation, relaxation, sleep, lucid dreaming, and beyond to all these other experiences that I'm talking about. But again, supernatural threats. People get, there was this movie, The Entity, where this woman would have these sleep paralysis experiences where a demon would visit her, and they supposedly put it into a laboratory, and then all of the millions of people who report having either seen UFOs or been abducted by aliens. All of these practices are helpful because, again, they're very, very empowering. And I'm so excited to be able, that I've been developing these practices over the years, and I'm having quantum leaps because, I've had so much time to think about these, but I've never started to think as methodically as I have in just the past few months, even. And to really be able to accelerate my control over these non-physical experiences. When you have a dream, you can dream of buildings and whole cities and countries and just move around in this place, but it doesn't take up any space. It's not like your head explodes into all this other stuff like that. But the world that we all experience together now can be also understood as a shared dream. It's not really taking up any space. It just seems as stable as it is now because we're sharing it with everybody who's awake at the time. And we've agreed on these rules of gravity and electromagnetism and the strong nuclear force and the weak nuclear force. And our visual senses and our nine senses, we've agreed on that's how these things are supposed to act. But when we then withdraw ourselves from this shared dream, and we have our own private dreams, because most of us withdraw ourselves completely from that, then we have more control over it. If we're lucid dreamers, most of us are just, and I say us, but not really me, but most people are simply, they remain in a way just as they are when they're awake. They're basically unconscious and just allow the dream experiences to do whatever it wants to them because they have no awareness that they're dreaming, let alone to be able to control anything in it. And it's interesting because a lot of times I would prefer to be in that state more often than not, because being awake sometimes can be very frustrating, although it's simply more about I'm impatient because everything comes to me that I want to, for the most part. Almost everything. There's one major thing that was a massive disruption in my life when Floor died. I screwed that up. She was all the way on the other side of the world, but that was my fault. That'll be another story for another time. But anyway, this is coming up on an hour now, and I'm going to get out of here. And I'm going to do another similar podcast to this, but to more concisely summarize these ideas, which are basically starts with the practice of what I call imaginative role play meditation. And another type of meditation, which is a question, a mantra in the form of a question, am I dreaming? And the answer, yes, I'm dreaming. To help you then to begin lucid dreaming and then super lucid dreaming. And within these experiences of the imaginative role play meditation, to practice certain things like navigating through familiar spaces, home, work, school, and then practicing certain abilities, levitating, floating, flying, telekinesis, influencing random number generators to do what you want them to do, opening and closing doors, drawers, windows, lifting objects, bringing them towards you and pushing them away from you, and manifesting other things like stationary tools and weapons. And when you're able to master these things, the different supernatural threats, whether they be hauntings, demonic hauntings, or interactions with evil beings, malevolent spirits, or alien abductions and other things that seem to cause us nightmares, and we become empowered and we become confident. And in that way, our lives become better because we learn how to overcome and control things by using the most powerful force in all of existence, which is thought, consciousness, awareness, spirit, soul. So, yeah, I'll summarize this again, but that's all for now. This is going to be the end of this, so let's see. What am I going to do here? All right. Yeah, I'm just going to play I'll play my call to action again, but you know what? I got to change this because you can go to UniquilibriuM.com and I have a support tab there. But I got to change this pre-recorded message. So you know what? Nah, we're just at 1 hour and 2 minutes. I'm just going to play the song Frequency Squeal and get on out of here. So, yeah, that's it. This is Hakeem Ali Bokus Alexander. You're listening to the UniquilibriuM podcast. You can check out some more stuff on UniquilibriuM.com. And say what's up to me if you like. I'll leave my phone number in the podcast notes as well. I don't do it all the time, but it's 718-395-7717. You can also reach out to me at Hakeem@hypnoathletics.com. Here is the track Frequency Squeal. All right, people. Until next time, stay well.